Welcome back to the Hobby Hatch, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the intro. It took me a lot longer than I care to admit to make, but please join me in this episode as I turn this Man Rodi Iron-Blooded Orphans Gundam into a custom mech for my sci-fi universe, A World To Lament. The Man Rodi Gundam kit has a really nice shape to the torso, so using that and the original hip assembly, I began to shape the mech. So we've skipped ahead just a little bit, as I had the idea to fit a Questoris Knight cockpit and its pilot into the center of the mech torso. This did require a lot of dremeling, so I thought I'd save you the trouble of watching that and cut most of it out. I fought tooth and nail to get that into the torso section, but we got there in the end. As you can see, I've also created some legs, just some mock-up legs with ABS rod. And those little studs at the bottom were just kind of to set the pose on the base. I used a Questoris Knight power gauntlet or power fist as the feet, and they're a little asymmetrical. They're not the same because it's one gauntlet piece, but I think it works quite well. And of course, easily enough, somewhat easily enough, I was able to use the fingers that came with that kit for the power fist for the toes. For the arms, I decided I would use the Gundam kit arms as they're really nicely posable, and it was able to give me quite a nice pose with the gun and everything. And so I just hot glued them in place before whipping out some more Questoris Knight little bits and bobs, this case being a rocket pod for its back. And it was coming along quite nicely. The arms are a nice starting point to get the rough pose of the mech in place, but they will be getting quite a lot more work done on them to de-Gundamify them before the final build is complete. So initially I was just going to have the canopy locked open, but I thought it would just be really cool if I could open and close that. So I used a bit of bronze wire and some other Gundam parts to build a hinge that I could lock shut. I had a leftover Hyper Bazooka from a different Gundam kit that kind of just sat in the box. I thought, this would be perfect. I could lob this onto the shoulder of my mech and it could have a big cannon of some kind. So I shaved it all out with the Dremel, and once it was in nice placement, I glued it in place. So at this point, I just couldn't stop adding weapons to it. So I found a little, I think it's, I don't even know what kit this is from. I think it's from the Redemptor Dreadnought, the little minigun that goes on its arm, and I shaved out a place for that with the Dremel and glued that into the nose. And then on to the polymer sculpting. So I used Milliput and a pretty much a 50-50 mix of Milliput and green stuff for the sculpting. This is just to fill out some of the leg areas that were a bit bare with ABS rod, as well as adding some bulk to change the overall silhouette of the arms. I also went ahead and sculpted some padding to the inner section of the canopy. So you might be able to tell from looking at the mech by now, but I took a lot of inspiration from the Mazda Krieger series and artwork. You might be able to tell the white pieces of plastic that I've been gluing on were from an original Mazda Krieger kit. My first video, actually, I think was a Mazda Krieger kit. So I used similar design philosophy when tackling the joints of the mech, to kind of keep that round armor aesthetic. So onto the gun. So I wanted a rounded off kind of fire weapon of some kind. And so after gluing on a plasma gun front to the gun at the back of the Gundam gun so it could still slot into the hand joint we had on the mech, I started adding polymer putty to the outside, rounding off all those edges and giving it this kind of weird alien thermally protected shape. After placing it in the Gundam's hand, I created a fuel feed to the gun using a piece of twisted copper wire, connecting that from the back of the gun to a conveniently placed port in the mech's chassis. And so after spending all that time building the cockpit in the middle of the mech and fitting it in there, I worked on the pilot. I did not too much to the pilot. I added a little rebreather unit to his torso and shaved off some of the more Warhammery looking parts on his pauldrons. I then wanted the mech pilot to kind of operate through a augmented reality visor, so I sculpted that onto his head with some polymer putty, putting a couple of bits of very small ABS rod in for some extra flair. I then glued in a piece of copper wire to act as his rebreather tube. And after that, everything got a primed black, and it was ready to paint. It's always nice to have the models nice and primed on color. It gives everything a bit of cohesiveness. You kind of start to picture what it's going to look like at the end. I gave everything a nice pre-shade of a nice reddy brown color from the shadows, as well as a kind of pale, bit more desaturated green as a highlight tone. I did end up painting over most of this. The mech's larger armor panels do kind of make it a little difficult to do a traditional style of painting, and so we don't really see much of it put through in the end, but it was nice while it lasted. All the metals, as you can see, are getting a dry brush of a nice dark metal color before I went in and painted the whole carapace ivory. I saw some really lovely artwork on Instagram. I'll link it in the description of some armor panels that were being painted a nice ivory mottled effect for some Titans. And I decided I'd do the same. Unfortunately, my god, this is why we don't paint in white, because this took about 4 coats over the whole thing, and it's still very splotchy. I don't think it could ever be really nice and clean unless I sprayed it, but I did want a little bit of the splotchiness, and that ties into the next step. So for the next step, I used a dark brown or umber wash, and then I painted it over the panels, and then just dabbed it with a bit of paper towel. And once that was over the entire piece, I went in with a dark black oil wash, and I did the exact same thing. And the idea of this is to give it a nice kind of a pre-weathered look. Everything is a little bit grungy. Everything is a little bit, splotchy. There's no smooth tones over the surface. And it does come out looking really quite nice at the end. It's kind of one of those trust the process, am I ruining my whole project I spent hours on step. But in the end, it worked out really nice. Alrighty, so this is where I started adding some other colors to the carapace. So I masked off some key points on the tanks at the back, the knee pads, and then on the weapons. That I then went in and painted a nice rich red color. All the while I was doing this, I was also painting the pilot. He got the exact same color scheme, like his armor was the ivory, he got the same washes and everything, and his helmet, I painted the red color. I highlighted this with a nice bright orangey red color. It looks more orangey on camera than it is in person, but it did the job quite nice. I then went over the armor, the sections that I wanted to be brighter, with the same ivory color as I did for the base coat, and I just picked out the areas and built up those layers. I think 2 or 3 layers it took to get a nice consistent highlight, and in the end it turned out quite nice. Which, I mean, thank goodness for that, because by this point, oh my god, I was worried. I was worried the armor wasn't going to look very good, but it did. I also painted the interior of the cockpit, and that got a nice greeny OSL effect. Quite a quick one, to which I added in the pilot, and I kind of bled the OSL effect over him as well. He does have a little red LED on his chest piece as well, and that kind of bleeds out. It's a little more difficult to see than the green. Alrighty, so I decided that all of the decals and livery on this thing were going to be freehand for some reason. So I've got all the footage here sped up by about 700%. But just to give you a little bit of background onto why I chose these symbols. So this mech is a member of the mercenary group, the Legion of the Seventh Son. The World of Lament is a mystical and superstitious one, and unfortunately for people born as the seventh sons in a family, they tend to be cast out and ostracized. Many of these ostracized sons have created a mercenary group, look out for each other and take up any work that they can, dubbed the Legion of the Seventh Son. They are one of the many mercenary groups that you will find out in the Wastes of Lament, but one of the few that are able to field and maintain mechs of this size. This mech's name is Cyclops, and to build up on that theme, I decided to paint a nice large eye on the center of the cockpit, as well as keeping the Roman numerals for 7 for the Legion iconography, and some other eyes to kind of set it apart. With the freehand done, I began the weathering step. So I went in with a sponge and then after a brush to add some nice darker patches where some paint might have rubbed away and we're seeing some corrosion, before touching it up with some dark metal to make it look like some of that metal has been exposed. I then went in with some AK Interactive's rust effects to kind of add that like silt layer that you get with corrosion. As you can see, it did add a nice silty effect to the areas I wanted the corrosion, but it was quite bright, so I dialed it down with some dirty down rust, which I painted over all the silty areas, as well as painting in some streak effects over the areas of the carapace that had exposed metal. Once that had a chance to dry, I dry brushed over all of the sections that are just metal, so the feet and the guns. And after that, he was done, and I moved on to the terrain. So for the terrain, I tend to do this before I actually finish building the mech, so you'll kind of see the mech at different stages while I do this, but I cut a piece of foam, build up a border of plasticart around it, and fill it with texturing putty. I then began mocking up some of the details on the base, so I decided I'd have a cool little fence that's kind of decrepit and fallen over. To do that, I used some square and round dowel that I drilled some holes in, along with some wire that I twisted up. And I threaded that all through and set it in place. Also, while I had leftover wire, I decided I'd create some barbed wire rolls. I just rolled up some of that wire on the dowel that I didn't use, kind of twisted it out and stretched it out and glued it in place as well. I did also make a little tree off camera. If you'd like to see how to do that, I do go more in detail with that in an older video. I will link that into the description. I glued in some of those rocks and then covered the entire base in some Mod Podge before layering in some fine gravel for some nice extra texture. So once that was all dry, I moved on to priming and painting. After a nice black coat of primer, I went in and base coated all of the woods, as well as all of the stones in their respective browns and greys. And because I like the matte kind of effect that the doing an oil wash leaves, I covered the entire base, just base coated with everything at this stage, with a burnt sienna and burnt umber oil wash before then going in after that had completely dried and beginning to highlight all the elements. Starting with the rocks, just building up from that darker grey to a nice brighter grey. I mixed in some green as well. As well as highlighting all of the wooden objects. To give the ground a bit more definition, I went over it with a nice bright brown with a dry brush, just from the same direction I'd like the light to be coming in. And to further push some of the color variation in the soil, I went through with I think this is Plague Bearer Flesh contrast paint. The metals then got the same dirty down rust treatment as the mech, before I went in with my other favorite dirty down product, the dirty down moss, which I slathered pretty much over everything just to give the landscape a kind of mossy, swampy, kind of gross aesthetic, which I kind of go for with all my Lament dioramas. With that dry, I went in with some Vallejo pigment powders. This also just ties in and gives a little bit extra color variation as well as texture variation over the base. I tend to find it gives it a nice, more realistic view. You've got lots of different textures, lots of different colors kind of mingling and mixing, especially for dirt. Once all of that was done, I considered the diorama nice and finished, and the last thing to do was to peel off the masking tape on the base, and it was onto the Glamour Shots. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. As always, if you like the content, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more. This mech was a massive undertaking, so please don't hesitate to leave a comment and let me know how you think I did. I hope everybody enjoyed the old CRT computer effect I put in at the beginning and end of the video. I tried to pack in a few lore Easter eggs in there, so let me know if you spotted any, as well as any feedback or questions in the comment section below. If you'd like to keep up to date with what I'm currently working on, you can always check out my Instagram. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Anyway, thanks again for watching, everyone. Consider checking out one of my other videos, and I'll see you in the next one.